After suffering gruesome injuries on Mustafar, Darth Vader was forced to rely on a suit of life support armor to keep himself alive. While the loss of his limbs and him being burned alive is shown on screen, the full extent of his injuries is something fleshed out in the books. While his injuries obviously changed him physically, they also greatly affected his mental state and what he thought of himself. Vader's thoughts on his injuries and his armor are explained in the Legends novel Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader, as he contemplates his existence a few weeks after the events of Revenge of the Sith. Vader was immensely frustrated by the physical limitations that the armor imposed upon him. His movement was hindered to such an extent that he could barely maintain a kneeling posture when speaking to the Emperor, and this enraged him. Weeks after Mustafar, Vader began to wonder if his suit was constructed poorly on purpose in order to keep him weak. Although Vader did not receive confirmation at that point, we know that it's absolutely true. Palpatine did make the suit as restrictive and painful as possible in order to ensure that Vader was strong in the dark side yet could not overthrow him. It's still very interesting to know that Vader suspected that himself. Vader felt incredibly bitter about his situation after the rise of the Empire, and he considered himself a mere minion, an alleged apprentice of the Sith. While he had retained his knowledge of the Jedi arts, he questioned his place within the Force, and feared that he could not sustain the power of the dark side in his new cybernetic state. He angrily thought of how the Force itself had humbled him by stripping him of everything he had, comparing himself to Darth Maul and Dooku, who were also humiliated and cast aside as Palpatine's plans unfolded. Vader resented his master, since he believed that while Palpatine had achieved victory and gained everything, he had lost everything, including the confidence and skill he had once held as Anakin Skywalker. As Vader adjusted to life inside his armor, he would bitterly think to himself that every single one of his movements was an abomination. He was perpetually dismayed by the incompetence of the medical droids that had rebuilt him into a machine. For his mechanical legs, the droids had used an inferior alloy instead of durasteel, and failed to inspect the strips of metal that covered the electrical wiring. As a result, the inner lining of his armor would constantly snag on his knee and ankle joints as he moved. The boots of the armor did not fit his mechanical feet, and they were raised in the heel, leaning him forward and forcing him to move with caution to avoid tipping over. It became so difficult for Vader to walk that he needed to call upon the Force for assistance, which infuriated him even more. His armor limited the movements of his mechanical arms so much that he couldn't even raise them above his head. While Vader knew that he could adjust the arms to deliver enhanced physical strength, he was not impressed by that, since he had always possessed the ability to crush anything through the power of the Force. Vader also felt a seething hatred for his mask and helmet, which he despised the design of. He felt that it was needlessly angular, and with the helmet attached, he had to crane his neck at nearly a 90-degree angle just to see his feet. Because his eardrums had melted in Mustafar's heat, sound waves were transmitted through implants inside his helmet, but they distorted everything as though he was underwater. Because the helmet's audio sensors were poor at distinction and isolation, Vader found it very difficult to comprehend the distance and direction of whatever he was hearing. Yet despite all of these limitations and failures, he considered the biggest flaw of his armor to be the breathing apparatus. From the control box that pierced through his chest, a thick cable entered directly into his torso, connecting the respirator to a heartbeat regulator. His chest also housed an implanted ventilator, with tubes running directly into his scorched lungs and throat. This additional tubing from the ventilator allowed him to breathe unassisted for a short time if his armor ever stopped functioning. Vader hated the chest control panel, believing that its flashing lights served as constant reminders of how vulnerable he truly was. With the beeping of the panel and the rasp of his respirator, he could barely rest inside the armor, which is why he preferred to sleep inside a bacta tank. The only time that he could consume food and drink through his mouth was when he retreated to one of his hyperbaric chambers. Otherwise, he would rely on nourishment through intravenous liquids. Additionally, since his burned body had needed to be covered in synthetic skin, Vader needed to have his entire body scrubbed and cleaned constantly to dispose of rotting flesh. While conforming to life inside his armor, Vader also developed claustrophobia as he longed to break free of the armor's restrictive shell. He considered living in the armor to be perpetual torture, and believed that his cybernetic existence was not truly life. Vader ultimately thought of himself as wreckage left behind by the Clone Wars, and he cursed Obi-Wan and Padme for confining him to the black armor. Thank you guys for watching this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and may the Force be with you.